Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another video. So it is Saturday at about 9:50. It's supposed to be a pretty overcast day, but yesterday was really nice. We've had some really nice weather this week. Yesterday was the first day of school, or actually second day of school for me. School started, went back into session Wednesday. So yeah, it was nice. It was nice. It was pretty mellow the last 2 days, so it was a nice way to kind of ease back into the season. So it was cool, and I've been doing. I got more time now with my schedule, and I have a pretty busy schedule, but it's really fixed. It's a pretty fixed schedule for the most part. But the cool thing about my schedule is that even when it's maybe a little bit busier than your average week, I have like a lot of flexibility with my schedule. I can. It's easy to move things around and to shift things around if I need to. But the cool thing now is with my school year schedule is I have a lot more time to do things in my regular downtime, and so I can go back to doing these videos more often. I usually do them. I usually do one a day, and there was a bunch of weeks and maybe a month or so where I wasn't quite able to do them this summer. Maybe more. I would do them and then set them in premiere mode, and had some videos popping up here and there throughout the summer. But I wasn't able to do a daily kind of thing like I usually do, just because of scheduling stuff. I had a lot less time to do it in the morning, to as far as uploading the videos and posting them and all those things. But so I'm excited that I can kind of go back to the a little bit more of my daily routine around talking about the movies I love. So lately I've been pretty immersed in the world of Stanley Kubrick. I did a big video on him last year. Actually, I should say this year, where I did a specialty video where I just focused on Stanley Kubrick, and he is my favorite director of all time. So I'm kind of going through his movies again. I'm kind of going through, at least for this channel, I've been thinking about covering all of his movies in my downtime, and in time of where I'm not necessarily seeing new movies all the time. Because again, there's so many things that I want to get to, coverage wise, so many different shows. One thing I really want to do, and it's been a little bit tough, mainly because of scheduling, and I haven't really looked into doing it. But I really, moving forward, I really want to get back into doing some interview segments. So that's a super fun thing for me. It's really eye opening. I learn a lot. I love the give and take of different information from, I've got some good experience working with some actors and people in the industry, and I've had them as guests on the show, and I really really enjoy it. That's my favorite part overall of this whole crazy thing. So stay tuned for that. And yesterday I did a big show on 2001: A Space Odyssey, of course, by the amazing and the genius of Stanley Kubrick. So, continuing in that vein, I decided to do another show on my favorite director of all time, and that is Doctor Strangelove. This movie is such an incredible movie on so many levels. Probably one of the most topical films. Probably one of the most a movie or a concept for an idea for a movie that I think is so ahead of its time. You know, literally, we are living, you know, to a degree in this situation with the whole horrible situation that's been going on between, you know, Russia and the Ukraine, and kind of ushering in this like second or third wave of the arms race, which is horrible. And you know, essentially, we have these, you know, lunatics who are in charge of running our countries, running our governments, running our world that we freely elect, and their fingers are initially, you know, on the button to end it all. So, you know, and again, Stanley Kubrick, this movie is just such a masterpiece. And again, like I said, it's probably out of all of his films, this one probably rings the most and has the heaviest kind of forward thinking around where we are as a society and like right now. So ahead of its time, and it's hard to believe that this movie has, you know, that this movie came out in 1964. Just incredible. I don't own this on Blu-ray, which is kind of ridiculous. I have a really great DVD special edition copy of it. It has hours of interviews and you know, different people who worked with Kubrick. So many cool things on this disc. So I'm really happy with this, but I do need to get an upgrade with this film. But again, yet again, another classic by you know, my favorite director, Stanley Kubrick. The film is basically it plays out like a black comedy. It's definitely a departure or something. It's a film that's very different from the rest of the world of Kubrick. It's definitely like a satire, a black comedy, and it probably has the most or the biggest degree on social commentary on to a degree politics, you know, in our world, particularly around, you know, the threat of nuclear weapons and the threat of pure extinction of the human race. With this film, it's basically, like I said, a satire, a black comedy, and it is focused on the fears of nuclear conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, and it's usually loosely based on the thriller novel Red Alert, which was published in 1958, and it was written by Peter George, and he also co-wrote the screenplay play for Doctor Strangelove with Kubrick and Terry Sutherland. So that's pretty cool. I didn't realize that he was so heavily involved. And of course, this film stars the you know, one of the greatest actors ever, Peter Sellers. And Peter Sellers, I mean, one of the most iconic and one of the greatest actors ever. He was an English actor and a comedian. He kind of rose into prominence on, he was from Britain. He kind of, you know, came into prominence on, he had a BBC radio show series, The Goon Show, which was like a comedy show where it featured a number of hit comedy songs. And he became known, that that TV show, The Goon Show, really propelled Peter Sellers into you know, into the public's eye. His film discography is astounding, and the amount of diversity. Of course, he's probably most well known for playing Chief Inspector Clouseau from the Pink Panther series. I know when I was a kid, that was the first time, and that was a regular like British TV show, and it was a very popular show, and it was on. I remember as a kid seeing that all the time because it was in constant syndication, and that was the first time I ever came across Peter Sellers. He was born in Southsea, Portsmouth, England. He made his stage debut in King's Theatre in Southsea when he was 2 weeks old. His parents had a variety act and toured all the theaters. He worked as a drummer and toured around England as a member of the Entertainment National Service Association. He developed all of his improv skills, with in a spell with Ralph Reeder's Wartime and Gang Show Entertainment, which was like a comedy troupe. His career began basically in film in the 1950s. Um, and they really, like I said, his range, Peter Sellers, his range as an actor was, you know, definitely during that period of the 50s was unparalleled. But even today, just still so, so incredibly unique and unlike any other, actor then or now. Um, Certain films that he starred in 1959, I'm All Right, Jack. He was also in another movie that I need to cover, which is one of my all-time favorite films of Kubrick, and that is Lolita, 1962. Of course, Doctor Strange in 64. What's New, Pussycat in 65. He was in Casino Royale in 1967. The Party, 68. Being There, 79, and also the Pink Panther series. Um, and his role in Doctor Strangelove is just, again, it's something to be experienced. This film also stars George C. Scott, another incredible, incredible character actor, one of the greats. Of course, Patton. He played George Patton in 1970, iconic movie. He's also in The Exorcist 3. He was in The Exorcist 3, which I feel is like, The Exorcist is kind of a weird franchise, but the first Exorcist movie directed by William Friedkin is arguably and probably the best horror movie pound for pound ever made. And there's four movies altogether in that franchise, but The Exorcist 3 is really, really good, and that stars George George C. Scott. And the book is incredible. I've read the book. I read the book first, and then I saw the movie. But the rest of the movies in the franchise are kind of awful and dismissible. Of course, Doctor Strange, Strangelove, 64. Another really incredible horror film that he was in was The Changeling in 1980. Such an awesome horror film. Super underrated. The Rescuers Down Under in 1990, which was one of his more later films. He's also in one of my favorite Christmas movies, The Christmas Carol, based on the Charles Dickens story. For me, that is like the greatest rendition of that classic story. He's just an amazing movie. The Hustler in 1961, another awesome movie. So many great roles. So he's always been one of my favorite actors. Hardcore, which came out in 79, really great movie. 12 Angry Men, of course, that iconic classic. The Hospital in 1971, another fantastic movie. He was in Taps in 81, and also the original Firestarter. I mean, talk about a track record as an actor. Sterling Hayden, also amazing. He was one of my favorite roles of his was when he was in the original Godfather. Just incredible. Slim Pickens, James Earl Jones is in this film. Tracy Reed, Keenan Wyan, Peter Bull, Roy Stevens. The list goes on and on. I mean, you talk about an ensemble cast unlike anything else. Unlike anything else. Definitely, I feel like with Kubrick too, like there is not one of the things, and I've talked about that a lot before, is like when you reflect at you know directors of the past or directors now, and you look at their body of work and maybe where how consistent their work is or how great it is. But and then you also have tons of directors of where I don't know there was and again it's all a matter of opinion, but I feel that there's lots of directors where there was there's not that consistency. There's all these missteps and things go awry, and there's probably lots of contributing factors to that. But I feel like Kubrick is one of those directors of where I really feel that like literally every movie he put out during his career was a masterpiece, like just a work of art. He really defied people's like expectations or the public's expectations. He could do science fiction, he could do horror, he could do drama, he could really touch on and explore really really dark and taboo subjects, like case in point Lolita. He could do war movies, Passive Glory, for instance. He was amazing at doing period pieces, Barry Lyndon, and exploring so many different genres. And I mentioned it yesterday when I talked about when I did the show on 2001 A Space Odyssey, which I think at the end of the day is probably pound for pound the greatest science fiction movie ever made. And I also have to say, when it comes to horror movies, The Shining, I also feel the same way. It is probably pound for pound for pound overall the greatest um, horror movie ever made. Personally, it's pretty much my favorite. So it's interesting too. Like I said, I did a show yesterday on 2001 Space Odyssey, and you know, I had I had uploaded the video and shared it around and stuff. And I had a friend that commented, and I had when I had posted the clip, the video from my YouTube channel about 2001, I was saying how basically I think it's the greatest overall, the greatest sci-fi movie ever made. And I had a friend who commented, "What?" And she knows of my love. Her name is Donna, and she really knows of my love of Ridley Scott's Alien. And she's like, "What about Alien? I thought that was like your favorite sci-fi movie of all time." And I thought that was funny. And I said to her, "Well, it's an unparalleled classic without a doubt." But I said, "Well, Alien, I feel like for me, I consider that to be the perfect blending of horror and science fiction. I look at that as more of a horror movie, even though it is definitely a sci-fi. But with Doctor 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's pure science fiction. So that's why I kind of tried to make that clear, at least around my opinion around that film. But again, getting back to Kubrick's consistent career, I think like every film he's ever done is is a masterpiece. There's no clunkers in the bunch. Like it's just amazing, and just how consistent he was, how every concept that he brought to the table for each film was so clearly defined. And like in his past, and like I did a big show on Kubrick. And I've talked about I talked about his past and his history and how he kind of came about. Came about as a film director, and I feel in like from a really unique uh, perspective, or just had an incredibly unique way of getting into the film industry. He for many years he made his living as a well, not I should say he started off as a he went to photography school, and he became the head photographer for Look magazine in New York, which was an internationally recognized publication, and he was the chief photographer. So he also went to school for photography, and so he made his living. So his whole thing in the beginning of his career was obviously geared towards photography and the essence of the visual. And he also was a an amazing chess player. And he also there's all these great stories of him of where he lived and was based in New York for a long period until he eventually moved to England with and had and moved with and started his family in England. But he lived in New York for a very long time. He was born in New York, and he was a professional chess player. And for a long time, he would make a living or have a source of income where he would play chess in Central Park. And and I've always felt that you can really, because of his unique background being a photographer, a professional photographer, but then also a professional chess player, you can see that in his work. Like the level of detail I feel is so unparalleled in his work. And the use of the concept of the idea of like using strategy, finding the pieces that really fit to that puzzle. And I feel like that stuff, that mindset or those tools came from his chess background. So and then how he eventually the whole thing of how he actually became a filmmaker, I always think is just such a crazy story because he had a buddy, a friend of his at the time that was in film school, and Kubrick has said many times in the past that he never growing up he never really he liked films, but he never considered himself a connoisseur of films or a lover of films. He saw movies in passing and he liked them, but he never really was a huge fan. And he had a friend that was a filmmaker, and his friend had invited him to go to this showing at that school that he was going to, where they were showing all of these student films. And so Stanley Kubrick, went with his buddy to go to this big premiere, and they were showing all of the student films. And Kubrick left there, and I remember in this interview, he like turned to his friend and also in this interview that I've heard or in interviews, he basically said that he didn't like any of the films that he saw, and he thought he could do something much better than any of these filmmakers. He could make something at a much higher level. And then he left the theater and left the show, and then he decided to become a filmmaker like then and there, and that's how he became a director. And I just think that's incredible. So he kind of came out of it, or kind of I don't know, to a degree, had this like became or had adapted this perspective of or idea of becoming a filmmaker from like this kind of like competitive uh, angle, which I think is pretty wild and pretty hilarious. But you know, I I really believe you see that in his work. And I feel like other directors like Ridley Scott or Brian De Palma. I love their work to death, especially early Ridley Scott, especially early Brian De Palma. 70s, 80s. With Ridley Scott, I would say that the 80s. And late 70s. But and again, it's a matter of opinion. But I feel like there wasn't the later parts of both of their careers. A lot of their films, I just feel, are not consistent. If you look at Stanley Kubrick's work, where everything is just miraculous. And I think another director that has that same consistency throughout his career, Martin Scorsese. And I think maybe why that's true, or maybe why that's a thing, is Kubrick really had integrity, and he had total control over everything that he did, even in the face of you know extreme adversity or like interference in the studio. I mean, there's that one case, where the one movie he like doesn't really believe was his film at the end of the day, even though his name is attached to it. And he actually tried to get his name removed from the movie. Was Spartacus with Kirk Douglas. I actually really love that movie, and I have that on Blu-ray, and I actually really love that movie. But the Kubrick was their whole. He battled with the studios in the studio the entire time, and also battled with Kirk Douglas over all kinds of decisions. And he had lots of pressure. And at the end of the film, the studio kind of had more control over that film as far as like editing, shortening the movie. And when the movie was wrapped, he wanted to basically remove his name from the film. So, but I still, even though I know that's the case, I still really love that movie. I still think it's when I think of Kubrick and his films, I still include Spartacus within that as being a great film, and definitely a Kubrick film. Even though, there was so much, there was so much of a black cloud around that film for Kubrick. But and then I feel like with directors like Brian De Palma or Ridley Scott, I think they might have just, I don't know, they might have just lost their way as they went. They might have they couldn't deal with, say, box office disappointments, or they had later in their career they had they were willing to compromise with their studios, and or they just didn't have the control or the vision that they once had. I think there's a bunch of variables as to why that's probably true. But I feel like Scorsese and Kubrick, for instance, and there's other directors that I feel you can say that everything is consistent. I feel like, with me as a fan, for me as a fan of those directors, they just seem to have this high level of integrity and focus, and so they were so hyper focused on their vision, that they were unwilling to compromise, with their work. So just astounding. And Doctor Strangelove is one of those films. I mean, just an astounding movie. And again, a movie that I feel Kubrick really, with the story, really tied in a critique, involving social commentary about where we are as a society, with the political nature of how we are, and how we possibly, are facing, the end of human, the end of the human race because of these essentially psychopaths that we, elect every year. But amazing movie, an amazing classic. I need to get this on Blu-ray at some point. So, thanks again. This is Jason Dean, and we will see you next time. Peace.